So I do talk about things that are going on in other countries, and I believe that this is parallel to our country anyway. The BBC has two articles out, and they make sense and go hand in hand to me. So this first article, now this is from November. It says, "What does NEET stand for, and how many are there in the UK?" Remember, NEET stands for not in employment, education, or training. So these people are not in school and they're not working. And they're also having their own birth rate crisis. Women are opting out or simply being one and done. Now, how does this go together? It seems like it goes together to me, but many people are not connecting all of these dots. So let's go ahead and jump into these articles. All right, back to this article about NEETs. It says in her November budget, Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced £820 million of funding to guarantee paid work placement for 18 to 21-year-olds not earning or learning for over 18 months. The aim is to tackle the number of young people not in education, employment, or training, also known as NEETs. They account for 1 in 8 people aged 16 to 24 in the UK, according to the latest figures. What does NEET mean? A young person is considered NEET if they are unemployed, they're looking for work, or economically inactive, not actively looking for work, and not waiting to start a job or caring for a family. They are not considered to be NEET if they are in formal education such as school or university, doing an apprenticeship or vocational course, or in full-time or part-time work. How many NEETs are there? Every 3 months, the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, releases figures on the number of NEETs in the UK. So the ONS produces its estimates from its labor force survey. Fewer people have responded to the survey in recent years, which makes the results more volatile than in the past. There were 946,000 young people who were NEET in the UK in the period from July to September 2025. That's equivalent to 12.7% of all people aged 16 to 24. And it looks like these numbers pretty much stay within that range. 923,000 at one point during the year, 948,000 during another point during the year. At the bottom, it says the largest quarterly NEETs total was recorded in July to September 2011, when the number peaked to over 1 million after the 2008 financial crisis. And so the reason why I talk about some of these things globally, we had that financial crisis as well. Lots of things happen globally that impact all of us. And this NEET phenomenon is not extraordinary or out of the ordinary for the UK and other places. This right here is important to hear. Who are the NEETs? Historically, more women than men have been NEET. But in recent years, that trend has reversed, and the ONS says a young man is more likely to be NEET than a young woman. Research by the government into 16 and 17-year-old NEETs found they were more likely to be white than have another ethnicity. Outside of this age group, however, the Youth Futures Foundation found that Black Caribbean, and Black African young people had a higher NEET rate than the UK average. Why are there so many NEETs? The Youth Futures Foundation says one of the main causes of economic inactivity over the past 3 years has been a rise in long-term sickness among young people. Figures from the Department of Education shows that more than half of the NEETs in England in 2024 had a health condition. Around 1 in 5, or 18%, had a mental health condition. DFE data also shows that more than 10% of young people who are NEET have learning difficulties. The jobs market is also particularly challenging for young people, with 2025 figures showing a falling number of vacancies and fewer people on payrolls. Analysis published in August 2025 suggested that more than half of the jobs lost since the previous budget have been in the hospitality sector, a sector which traditionally employs a disproportionately high number of people in the 16 to 24 age group. Low pay and a lack of availability has previously been an issue for young people finding apprenticeships, while some graduates have also experienced difficulty finding work after university too. Now, I know that this is talking about the ages 16 to 24 age group, but I do know and understand that the economy is the economy everywhere. And there are lots of people that are having to take jobs that maybe they are overqualified for, or just lots of people not in the job market anyway. Women are outperforming men where it comes to going to college and just taking jobs just for the sake of having jobs. So that's the reason why many NEETs are men more so than women, because women will take a job just to have a job and not necessarily just sit out. So that is going to cause an imbalance where it comes to having babies, because women see what is going on in the atmosphere. There are not a whole lot, the environment, not atmosphere, the environment. There are not a lot of productive dudes to actually have these kids with. And, let's not even forget the misogyny that's going on, the violence against women, all of these other things do play a part in why women are opting out of having babies. But this whole NEET situation, it causes some of these dudes to get upset because they're not getting the jobs that they thought that they were going to have. They're insecure when it comes to dealing with other women. So it's not just an economic thing. It's going to be a societal and social thing as well. All right, now let's go into the next article that I was talking about. Now, I know that this segue isn't perfect, but I do believe that many of the same factors that go along with these people being out of work goes along with what's going on with people deciding to be one and done. So that's how I got to this segue and why I think that this matches. All right, so this one's talking about how a fertility gap is fueling the rise of one-child families. Natalie Johnston was scrolling on Facebook a couple of years ago when she came across a group called One and Done on the Fence. Seeing it, she felt a sense of relief. It was nice to hear someone giving it a name. She and her husband have a 5-year-old daughter called Joni, but they knew they probably wouldn't have a second child. Not because they couldn't, but not out of choice either. Natalie finds it hard to imagine having the time and money for one. You'd love that baby, everyone tells you, but there's a tiny, teeny niggle where you think, what if I put my first in that position where she can't do the activity she wants to do because I've got to spread money out between two? All right, so look at this picture right here. Flexible working means a world to my family's well-being. Over here, affordable childcare equals more people in employment equals better economy. So lots of things that overlap in countries all over the world. But back to Natalie Johnston. She adds, is it okay to say you're only having one because they don't fit into modern ways of parenting? Modern parenting for Natalie, who's 35, looks like family holidays with Joni. It looks like weekday evenings hearing about her day at school and helping her with homework. But with demanding jobs and no family living nearby to help with childcare, it looks like an expensive childcare jigsaw. But ultimately, deciding whether or not to have a second is a tough decision. I think you worry you'd regret it, she says. The fertility rate was 1.41 children per woman in England and Wales last year, according to the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, the lowest on record for a third year running. Separately, the proportions of families with one dependent child has grown since the turn of the century. That includes families with one child, as well as those who also have children over 18 that may have left home. They made up 44% of all families in England and Wales with dependent children living with them, up from 42% in 2000, though the peak was 47% in the early 2010s, which then dipped before picking up again after COVID. The UK's falling birth rate is a part of what the United Nations calls a global fertility slump, which it puts down in part to money worries. People aren't turning their backs on parenthood, says the UN in a summary of its Population Fund's State of the World Populations Report, which surveyed people across 14 countries. Instead, it says they are being denied the freedom to start families due to skyrocketing living costs, persistent gender inequality, and deepening uncertainty about the future. Yes, that does. That gender inequality, that rise of misogyny, these patriarchal standards, and costs are kicking people in the butts. Bridging the fertility gap. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson said earlier this year that she wants more young people to have children if they so choose. She pointed to the expansion of funded childcare hours in England as a way the government was trying to recover dashed dreams. Annual nursery costs for a child under 2 in England did fall this year for the first time in 15 years, according to the children's charity Quorum. They are now an average of 12,425 pounds, down 22% on the previous year. However, they are slightly up in Scotland and Wales, over 12,000 pounds in Scotland and over 15,000 in Wales, 15,000 pounds in Wales. 12,425 pounds is around 16,500 US dollars. A study from the University College of London last year suggested 2/5 of 32-year-olds in England want children or more children if they are already parents, but only 1 in 4 of them are actively trying to conceive. Dr. Paula Shepherd, an anthropologist at the University of Oxford, believes parents in the West still think of having 2 children as the norm. However, she says there is a fertility gap and that for every 3 kids wanted, only 2 are born. A lot of this gap is driven by people starting families later and later in life, she explains, often a result of education and career opportunities for women and changing gender roles, and also probably because it is harder and harder to actually launch. That is the reason why I wanted to talk about NEET as well, because if it's harder to get into the job market, then yes, you do have to start having babies later in life. All of this goes together. All right, it says it becomes a whole lot more difficult to get pregnant, and it becomes a whole lot more difficult to keep the pregnancy. Fewer pupils, less cash for schools. The falling birth rate is giving education policymakers a headache. The number of pupils in England has dropped by 150,000 since 2019 and will fall by a further 400,000 by the end of the decade, according to the Education Policy Institute. Schools are given money per pupil, so fewer pupils means less cash. Less cash, in turn, is an issue for those head teachers struggling to fund staffing and resources. I skipped over some of this article because they're talking about the price tag that goes along with pupils. And I know that they do look at babies as pupils because they literally are. You know, they're getting money for kids being in school. And once they become adults, they are dollar signs because they go to work and they're productive, and then they pay into the pensions and all of that. So women are expected to have babies or hunch for humanity. And we're bigger than that. They're going to have to figure out resource allocation without just simply looking at women as walking dollar signs. But I am skipping a little bit. I'm skipping to here. A family was a workforce, and that was very much a necessity until the Industrial Revolution. Only after the Industrial Revolution and the introduction of child labor and welfare laws did that change. The opportunity cost and economic cost of children shifted dramatically. So here we're still talking about kids as far as opportunity costs and economic costs. At the end of the day, it does cost a lot of money to have kids. And we have talked about all of the reasons why people are having 1 or having 0 kids. It's pretty much the same all across the board. Back in the day when they were having this many kids, women didn't have access to birth control. Our bodies weren't ours. You know, people were having kids simply because lots of the kids were dying before age 1. So there are lots of things that have changed. We don't have to do this right now. And that's another reason why we're going to continue to see the number of children being born to women continuing to drop. Because women of this age, back when it was still black and white, didn't have the opportunity to say no. They didn't have choices. We have choices right now. And right now, it just ain't good to have a kid in this economy. Have you looked around? What's going on in this world? The political climate, the climate, the misogyny climate, all this stuff is going on. This is not a good time to be out here having kids. And then on top of that, like we were talking about earlier with the NEET discussion, a lot of these dudes are not working right now. Some are not working because they're not finding the most perfect job that they think that they should have. And some people aren't working simply because the jobs are not available. So I'm going to end it with that. Y'all let me know what you think of all this put together. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.